I had learned in nearly 100 years of life that the most dangerous things rarely arrive making noise. They enter slowly, with a harmless appearance, with gentle words, with a gesture that looks like kindness. And that is exactly how the story began that never left my memory. The gift came to me on a quiet afternoon, wrapped with care, beautiful enough to disarm any suspicion. The person who handed it to me smiled gently, as if offering nothing more than a simple object, something with no weight at all. But even before I fully touched it, something inside me closed. It was not fear, nor superstition, nor the fantasy of an old man. It was that silent feeling the body notices before the mind can explain it. And in that moment, I remembered an old teaching from Buddhism. Intention is the true origin of everything. No gesture comes empty. No offering is only matter. Every action carries the mental state of the person who makes it. And sometimes a gift comes covered in beauty, but inside it carries attachment, envy, guilt, neediness, or even the hidden desire to remain in your life in a way you never chose. In my youth, I would not have understood that clearly. I would have accepted it, thanked the person, and placed the object inside my home without thinking twice. But the years taught me to observe not only what arrives, but also what arrives with it. Because there are gifts that come in and peace remains untouched. You receive them, you give thanks, the atmosphere stays light, the heart does not contract, sleep does not change. The energy of the house remains clear. But there are others that seem to carry with them a formless shadow, a sense of weight that no one can prove, though anyone who is truly awake can feel it. The first great mistake of human beings is to think they should trust only what they can explain immediately. Not everything real presents itself to logic first. Some things touch the body first, then the environment, then the mind. And when you ignore that natural order just to seem polite, rational, or agreeable, you often have already begun to make room for something that should never remain. That is how I learned my first rule. A rule that protected me all the way to 100 years old. Never receive something only with your hands. Receive it with awareness as well. Observe what moves inside you at the very moment it is given. Is there a tightening in your chest, a nameless restlessness, a strange urge to step away, a sudden tiredness? A feeling that your energy has withdrawn instead of opening? Pay attention. I am not saying you should live in paranoia, nor that you should doubt every act of kindness. I am saying you should not betray your deepest perception for the sake of social appearance. Throughout life, I saw many people grow spiritually unwell because they kept close to them something that had disturbed their peace from the very beginning. And the truth time taught me is simple. When the soul pulls back before reason understands, it has almost always already seen what the eyes have not yet noticed. I accepted that gift out of politeness. I smiled, thanked the person, and took it with me, even while feeling that something in it had not come in peace. This is a very human mistake. Intuition warns us, but the fear of displeasing speaks louder. And many times, that is how disturbance enters, not by force, but through our difficulty in saying no. That night, the object was already among my belongings, and the atmosphere felt different. There was nothing visibly wrong, but rest did not come with the same lightness. My mind was more unsettled, as if something had crossed the door along with that gift. In Buddhism, I learned that not all disorder announces itself loudly. Some forms of it arrive in silence and spread first through the field of sensation. It was then that I understood an important truth. Appearance is never enough to judge a gesture. A gift may seem beautiful,
generous, and even respectful, and still carry the emotional weight of the person who offered it. Envy, guilt, attachment, neediness, and the desire for control do not always show themselves in words, but they often leave traces in what is given. The advice I leave here is simple. After receiving something, do not observe only the object. Observe what happens inside you and around you. If your peace decreases, if the atmosphere grows heavy, if the mind closes, do not ignore it. Sometimes the first sign that something did not come clean is not in the gift itself, but in the state it awakens after it enters your life. As the years passed, I realized that some gifts require immediate attention because they do not remain only in the symbolic realm. They touch the body, intimacy, and the energy of the home directly. I saw this happen with underwear, perfumes, jewelry, combs, brushes, mirrors, bedroom objects, figurines, and even food. Not every one of these things brings trouble, but when they come from someone with a confused intention, the risk becomes greater. I learned to pay special attention to whatever touches the body or enters the most sensitive spaces of life. Underwear, perfume, cosmetics, jewelry, and combs are not neutral objects when they also carry the emotional presence of the one who gave them. They accompany the body, remain on the skin, in routine, in intimacy. And what touches the body often also touches the mind more easily. I also became very careful with mirrors, bedroom decorations, paintings, dolls, figurines, and objects placed near the bed. The bedroom is a place of vulnerability, rest, and openness. When something enters there carrying weight, the disturbance usually appears first in sleep, dreams, fatigue, or in the feeling that the space no longer seems safe. A house speaks with our peace, and certain objects change that conversation without making any sound. Even food and plants taught me the same lesson. What is consumed enters the body. What is placed in the home enters the field of daily living. That is why one of my rules was always this: the more intimate the contact a gift has with your body or your sacred space, the greater your discernment should be. Not everything needs to be feared, but some things need to be observed early, before discomfort turns into disorder. The first sign was always the most subtle, and for that very reason, the most ignored. You received the gift and felt an immediate discomfort, a tightening in the chest, irritation for no reason, a strange desire to move it away. Many people call this exaggeration, but I learned to call it a warning. The body perceives before reason does. The second sign appeared when the person could not bring themselves to let go of the object, even when they wanted to. Guilt would arise, fear of hurting someone, fear of judgment, as if the gift had already created an emotional prison. And I learned something important. When something arrives as affection, it does not imprison. When it arrives to control, it often remains through guilt. The third sign came afterward. The object entered the house and, little by little, the environment changed. Sleep worsened. Moods became heavier. Arguments started for no clear reason. The mind grew more tired, and peace seemed to shift out of place. It was not always dramatic at first, but it was almost always a growing disorder, silent and persistent. That is why I adopted a simple rule all the way to 100 years old. If something arrives and steals your peace, your inner freedom, and the lightness of the environment, observe it honestly and do not insist on keeping it out of politeness. There are things that should be removed at the very beginning, because many people do not make their mistake in receiving, but in continuing to tolerate what has already shown that it did not come in peace.
Only with time did I realize that the true danger was not always in the moment of receiving, but in how long I allowed that thing to remain near me. Because there are gifts that disturb at first contact, and yet are still kept for days, months, or even years, simply because a person does not want to seem ungrateful, dramatic, or difficult. And that was exactly the mistake I saw repeated so many times throughout life. It was never the object alone that gained power, but the fact that it was allowed to remain in a space where peace had already made it clear it was not welcome. Most people do not suffer only because something bad entered their lives. They suffer because they insist on keeping close what, from the very beginning, had already shown it did not come in peace. I had to learn that the hard way myself. In my youth, I believed that enduring discomfort was a sign of maturity. I thought throwing something away because of a strange feeling would be weakness, ingratitude, or an overactive imagination. But Buddhist philosophy taught me something else. Holding on to what disturbs you just because it arrived disguised as a kind gesture is also a form of ignorance. We suffer greatly when we place other people's opinions above the state of our own mind. And that is advice I would have given myself much earlier. Do not keep in your home what your peace rejected on the very first day. Because what begins as a small discomfort can, over time, become a constant weight on your sleep, your mood, the energy of the environment, and even the clarity of your thoughts. Many times, the object did nothing extraordinary. That was exactly what made it so confusing. It simply stayed there, seemingly harmless, yet the atmosphere became more tense, the mind more burdened, rest less deep. And little by little, the person began to doubt themselves. They told themselves it was tiredness, stress, too much work, or too much sensitivity. But deep down, one part of them knew exactly when it had started, knew the exact moment the house stopped feeling so light. By observing that pattern, I created a rule for my life. If something enters and with it, serenity begins to fade, I do not give the object the right to remain long enough to take root. Not everything needs proof in order to deserve distance. Sometimes lost peace is proof enough. After many years, I understood that throwing something away was not an act of anger, but an act of lucidity. It wasn't rejecting the person. It was interrupting the influence. It wasn't living in fear. It was refusing to keep sheltering what brought disturbance. And this applies to much more than objects. It applies to gestures, bombs, words, and presences. There are things that, once they show early that they steal your peace, should not be analyzed for too long. They should be removed. Because one of the greatest secrets to reaching 100 years old with a clear mind was not gathering more protection, but learning to remove early what should never have remained. The most uncomfortable lesson came when I realized that not every burdened gift gains strength only because of the one who gives it. Sometimes it finds a door inside us that is already half open. It was one of the hardest lessons of my life, because until then, it had been easier to believe that the danger existed only outside me. But Buddhism taught me to look inward as well, and that was when I understood that certain objects keep weighing on us because they touch a wound that has not yet healed, a need that still wants to be filled, a vanity that still wants to be fed, or a fear that still depends on other people's approval in order to feel safe. I saw this happen many times. A person would receive a piece of jewelry and, even while feeling uncomfortable, keep it close because it fed their sense of worth. Another would receive perfume or underwear and ignore intuition because, deep down, they wanted to feel desired, seen, or important. Someone would keep a mirror, a figurine, or a bedroom object because it seemed far too beautiful to throw away, even though they had already noticed the atmosphere had changed after it entered the house. And in those cases, the gift did not grow stronger only because of the energy of the giver, but because of the inner weakness of the one who could not let it go. This was a lesson I carried with me all the way to 100 years old. Not everything that stays in your life remains because it is powerful. Sometimes it remains because it found an attachment within you willing to defend it. In Buddhist philosophy, we learn that attachment is one of the roots of suffering. And this goes far beyond people or great desires. It also applies to small objects, symbols, memories, things that seem harmless but end up taking up too much space because they represent something we still have not resolved within ourselves. When a gift touches an emotional wound, it stops being just matter. It becomes a trigger, a bond, a fantasy, or a form of compensation. That is why I had to learn to ask myself one question before deciding to keep something with me. Do I want to keep this because it is truly good for me, or because it feeds a need that still controls me? That question protected me more than any complex ritual, because it took power away from confusion and returned clarity to my mind. That was when I understood an essential truth. Spiritual discernment without inner honesty is incomplete. It is not enough to question the other person's intention if you do not also examine the part of yourself that still wants to keep accepting what disturbs you. There are gifts that should be thrown away immediately, yes. But before that, it is necessary to recognize why you almost kept them. And when you discover that, something changes deeply. You stop living only by defending yourself from the world and begin with awareness to close the inner doors through which certain energies used to enter. That is how I learned that protection is not only removing the wrong object, but also healing within yourself what made that object seem necessary. After all of that, I followed simple rules.
I observed what each gift awakened. I never kept close what stole my peace, and I stopped accepting everything just to avoid displeasing others. That is how I came to understand that protection is not fear, it is clarity. I also learned to respect the energy of the home the same way one respects the body. If an object changed sleep, mood, or the lightness of the environment, I did not insist on keeping it. Not everything has to be explained completely in order to be removed wisely. The final rule was to trust the awakened mind more than the appearance of things. What comes in peace does not force itself to remain. What comes burdened almost always weighs, binds, or confuses. And at 100 years old, I can say that much disturbance would have been avoided if more people learned early not to shelter what had already arrived, stealing serenity. At the end of life, I understood that the problem was never only the object, but the unconscious way so many people allow certain things to enter and remain. A gift that steals your peace, weighs on the environment, and confuses your mind should not be treated as a detail. It should be seen for what it is, a sign that something did not come clean. And in some cases, the wisest action is not to keep it, overanalyze it, or wait for things to get worse. It is to remove it immediately. If someone gives you something and, from the very first contact, you feel discomfort, heaviness, guilt, restlessness, or notice that it touched your home and your body in a harmful way, do not ignore it. Underwear, perfumes, jewelry, combs, brushes, mirrors, bedroom objects, food, and strange decorations require even more attention because they come too close to your intimacy and your energy. Not everything needs to be feared, but all of it needs to be observed truthfully. After 100 years, my final rule became simple. What arrives as a blessing brings lightness. What arrives burdened brings disturbance. And when peace warns you early, listening to that warning is not ingratitude, it is wisdom. That is how I moved through life, learning that sometimes throwing something away immediately is not an overreaction. It is protection.